of the Visto Show. It is Josh here from Visto, CEO, Canadian immigration lawyer, and we are back for another episode. It's been a little while, well, I'll explain why. It's somewhere on the agenda right now, hint, hint. But we got lots to discuss. I missed the last one because I was out of the city, so we have a couple extra weeks to cover between us. So let's jump in because heck, we got a lot to cover. Hope things are going well. It's warming up here in Toronto, which is great. It's been hot and sunny all week, so can't complain there. IRCC continues to make lots of updates, lots of changes, but some have remained the same and remained quiet. We're going to talk about all of that today. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, if you could throw in a like or subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching live on LinkedIn, feel free to say hello in the chat. I always like to try to make these a very collaborative experience. If you are watching on YouTube, just keep in mind, I go live every 2 weeks on LinkedIn for the Visto Show. So if you do want to tune in live and join in the conversation, ask questions, take part in the conversations, the debates, share hot takes, then make sure you're following me on LinkedIn as well. All right, let's jump right the heck into it, folks, because it's been a weird month in the world of express entry. Now, I'm gonna refresh this page here because, as most of you know, express entry typically has a draw every 2 weeks. Right? Even if we look through the history here, April 23rd to April 10th, about 2 weeks, to about March 25th, about 2 weeks, to March 12th, about 2 weeks, right? You guys get my point. Express entry typically did their draws every 2 weeks. Now, as you'll notice here on this webpage, we have not seen a draw since April 24th. Well, what do you know? Ironically, today is May the 24th. So it's been a full month without an express entry draw. I haven't heard anything, so as per usual, we're left in the dark. If I could ask IRCC to fix one thing, and as we know, there's a lot to fix right now, sadly, but the one thing that I think would go the longest way is if they were just a little bit more transparent, right? If they were more transparent, it would just make everything easier for everybody, right? It would make things easier for aspiring immigrants. It would make things easier for immigration lawyers and consultants. But we have no idea what's going on, which means if a client comes and says, hey, do I have a good chance at express entry? We have no clue. Because number one, it's been hard to predict to begin with. And number two, there's been no draw in a month. And we don't know when it's going to start, right? Is this because they're gearing up for another big CEC draw? Or a TR to PR? Or none of the above? Was there a tech glitch? We have no clue. So anyways, I wish I had more information than that. Sadly, I do not. I don't know if anybody has the answer unless you're working inside IRCC. If you are and you're watching and you want to slip me a little hint here, I wouldn't be against it. But anyways, sadly, it's been a very quiet front on the express entry side. On the good side, we still have plenty more to discuss as I take my patented segue sip of water. You guys ever tried doing a live show? Like, if you have to talk for 20 to 40 minutes straight by yourself, it's kind of hard. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking or complaining and get back to the show. So the next thing I wanted to cover, there was a big update this week on citizenship. So the government of Canada, so this is a news release from 2 days ago, yesterday, the 23rd, if you're watching this live, or on the 24th. I will, of course, put a link to this in the chat right now, in case you want to follow along. Usually I skip the first paragraph or two, because it's just kind of background. Legislative changes in 2009 amended the Citizenship Act to add a first-generation limit to citizenship by descent, which means that a Canadian citizen parent can pass on citizenship to a child born outside Canada if they were either born in Canada or naturalized before the birth of the child. Okay, so you used to only be able to pass along citizenship to a first generation, so your child, if you were born in Canada or naturalized before the birth. As a result of the first generation limit, Canadian citizens who are born outside Canada cannot pass on citizenship and cannot apply for a direct grant. Today, the Honourable Mark Miller, Minister of Immigration, introduced legislation that would extend citizenship by descent beyond the first generation in a way that is inclusive and protects the value of Canadian citizenship. The legislation would automatically confer citizenship to persons born abroad to a Canadian parent who is also born abroad to the coming into force of this legislation. It would also extend access to a direct grant of citizenship to children born abroad and adopted by a Canadian parent beyond the first generation. Following the coming into force, parents born abroad who have or adopt children also born outside Canada will need to have spent at least 1,095 cumulative days of physical presence in Canada prior to the birth. So that's kind of crazy. It seems like a pretty big change. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been following citizenship legislation for a long time, but it seems like a pretty big change. Bill blah 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 would also restore citizenship to quote-unquote lost Canadians, individuals who lost or never acquired citizenship as a result of outdated provisions. People who may be impacted by the change proposed will no doubt have questions if the bill passes in Parliament. Okay, so it hasn't passed yet, and receives royal assent. We will work as quickly as possible to implement these changes. Okay, so seems like a pretty big change, allowing the second generation to acquire citizenship by descent, especially if not born in Canada. So for example, can we pull up an example here? So it seems to be now, so let's say we have parent born in Canada, and let's move this over here a little bit, and then we have a parent born outside Canada, and we'll put that right over here, and then we'll put child born in Canada, and then child born outside Canada, and then let's just say grandchild born in Canada and grandchild born outside Canada. Okay, so what this means is, what do you mean? Okay, legislation to add a first-generation limit to citizenship by descent, which means that a Canadian citizen parent can pass on citizenship to a child born outside Canada if they were either born in Canada or naturalized. So it currently stands that the parent, so let's say right now is green, the parent has to be born in Canada, and they can then pass along citizenship to a child if they were born in Canada. So they can pass it on to a child no matter what. So obviously if they're born in Canada, yes. And if they're a child born outside Canada, only if the parent was born in Canada or, where's the text? Or naturalized. So this is how it stands right now. Pardon my terrible, terrible design skills, right? So this is how it is right now. Right now, if you're somebody who's born in Canada or were naturalized in Canada before you've had children, then your children can get citizenship if they're born in Canada or if they're born outside Canada, if I'm interpreting this correctly. As a result of the Canadian citizens who were born outside Canada cannot pass on citizenship to their child outside Canada and cannot apply for a direct grant. Okay, yeah. So this situation is not covered, right? A parent born outside Canada and a child born outside Canada. Not covered, right? Not allowed doing it now. This is the only way you can pass on citizenship by descent. Okay. Today, blah, 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 that would extend citizenship by descent beyond the first generation in a way that is inclusive. The legislation would automatically confer citizenship to persons born abroad to a Canadian parent who is also born abroad. Okay, so now let's put this in red. This would be like a new, obviously this will stay, the green would remain, and what they'll be adding is if you're a citizen, right? Obviously, let me put this here, just so we're 100% sure. So you're a citizen, right? You're a Canadian citizen. You were born outside Canada, but you became a Canadian citizen, and you give birth, born abroad, to a Canadian parent who is also born abroad. So you can now do this, and then obviously this, right? So now, even if you were born outside Canada, but then became a Canadian citizen, and you then give birth eventually to a child outside Canada, you pass on citizenship to them. It would also extend to children born abroad and adopted by a Canadian parent beyond the first generation. Following the coming in of the parents born abroad who have or adopt children also born outside Canada will need to have spent at least blah blah. Okay. So if you're outside Canada, or if you spent at least X amount of days, right? Spent X amount of days, blah blah blah, and they were born outside, then you might still be eligible. But I thought they said beyond even the first generation. Today, and that would extend by descent beyond the first generation in a way that is inclusive. This I'm looking for to persons born abroad to a Canadian parent who is also born abroad prior to the coming into force of this. It would also extend access to a direct grant of citizenship to children born abroad and adopted by a Canadian parent beyond the first generation. So does that mean that this would also include these as well? I'm a little unclear about that because it says beyond the first generation. So I don't know. I don't know if that means what is this? Is this this is a generation? This is a generation. This is a generation. Is this first, second, third? Or is this the first generation of children and then this is the second generation of children? I'm not 100% sure. Would also restore citizenship to lost Canadians, blah, okay. Anyways, little bit, I don't know. I'm a little unclear on how far down it goes. But anyways, it's clearly going to open this up. I'm wondering if timing is good on this. I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, we're in a time where the government on one hand is like swinging the pendulum back, right? Canadian immigration has pretty much been the Wild West for the last 8 years. Things went crazy, numbers got crazy, and what it led to, just in the last 12 months, there's been express entry reduction, there's been study permit caps, there's been SUV caps, which we're going to talk about in a second, there's been PR, self-employed PR caps, which we're going to talk about in a second. So I'm a little bit confused by this. If they've been capping pretty much everything else, and now they're making, citizenship a lot easier to get. I don't know. I don't really know what to think about it, but I guess we'll kind of see how it plays out, or if you have any opinions, please let me know in the chat or the comments. Okay, let us move on. Couple other big announcements that have either been recent or I haven't had time to go over them, like since I've come back from my break. So number one, we haven't chatted about this since I went live last. Changes to the startup visa and self-employed persons programs. So basically what happened, and I'll put the link to this in the description as well, is I think this is kind of played out basically exactly. I would relate the startup visa program basically as an equivalent in terms of policy and what we've seen happen over the last 8 years. The startup visa and the international student space. Both exploded, highly unregulated, government's done nothing, shady players. It's kind of crazy. So basically what happened was the startup visas got huge influx. There's apparently something like 16,000 applications in the backlog. So what does IRCC do? They come in and they're capping it to 10 startups per designated organization. I think there's something like 80 or 90 designated organizations. So that means, 800 to 900 applications for the year. And they just totally closed the self-employed persons programs, right? So again, I think a little bit extreme, but probably need to have. So here's my issue with these extreme caps and removals is it's just one end of the spectrum to the other, right? So for example, like if we have a spectrum, I'm not going to save that picture. If we have a spectrum of like highly regulated / monitored and barely regulated / monitored, right? So we have a spectrum, right? And, it goes from 1 to 10, right? My problem is IRCC has been living on the fringes of the spectrum. So for the last 8+ years, with the startup visa, with the study permit, there's basically been nothing. They've barely regulated anything. They've barely monitored everything. And surprise, surprise, all these shady players pop up. Fraud, this, that, or the other, scams. And then after 8+ years, they finally wake up and go, oh, crap, this needs really big fixing. And they fly over to this end of the spectrum and say, okay, we're going to make huge caps and big changes and blah, 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 right? That's not how I would prefer things happen. I would prefer that they just kind of sit in the middle, right? Or, sit somewhere closer to here, right? Maybe oh God, that's bad. Maybe they're just like a consistent 2 or 3, right? Like you don't want to regulate too much because, then you're kind of restricting innovation and blah, blah, blah. But I would rather them live in like the 3 to 5 range consistently than like sit here for 8 years and then fly over here for however many years. That's my opinion. I don't know if you agree or disagree. But basically this is going to punish what's happened is because they haven't monitored or regulated the startup visa, there's just been so much crap thrown into the pile. So now, who really gets hurt by this cap? Well, it's a legitimate startups and legitimate founders that actually would be a great fit for this program and a great fit for Canada and our economy. And now, you better hope they're in the top 800 or they're in big trouble, right? And even if they do get that letter of support, there's that big backlog to sit behind. So anyways, I think this is pretty sad. Did something have to be done? Yes. I wish they didn't wait so long and have to make it so extreme, but what can we do, as they say? Earl says citizens vote, PRs don't. That's true. That's true. I mean, we do have an election coming up, right? So that's a very good point made by Earl, which is, unfortunately, I wish that the government made all these decisions from an objective for the better of the country of Canada and future of Canada. But as we know, that's not always the case with politics, especially with an election year coming up. So again, 7, 8, 9 years of the Wild West. Now all of a sudden, big election year coming up, and there's some of these interesting changes that I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with. IRCC living on fringes, quote of the day, totally agree. Thank you. Okay, let's keep moving on. Couple other topics I wanted to cover. Number one was the International Student Program update. This is a little bit outdated, right? But I didn't have time to cover it on the last Visto show. Is basically they have changed the number of working hours that students can work off campus, right? So prior to 2022 in October, students could work 20 hours per week off campus. They removed that quota during COVID to help, the economy and blah, 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 and keep people happy. And now what they're doing is they're permanently changing that number. So they're making it 24 hours per week that students can work off campus. Is this good or bad? I don't know. I'm kind of impartial. I think it seems fine. Now, can't I'm trying to think back to like when I was in undergrad or when I was in law school, and could I have fit in a 24-hour work week and still kind of like maintained a good study practice? Maybe, maybe not. It seems like a big number, but on the other hand, I wasn't paying international tuition as well, right? So I wasn't expected to pay, 3, 4x the regular tuition. So I understand that element. So part of the explanation here is, as most shifts are 8 hours long, the new 24-hour rule means students can work up to 3 shifts a week. So I have heard rumblings of like, oh, it's really tough to get a part-time job at 20 hours a week because it's kind of an awkward number of hours, right? So it's hard to get employed. So I can certainly be compassionate to the students that have to, maybe fund a lot of their programs, and the cost of living in Canada is high. Again, but then the contrary to that is, well, isn't part of the study permit application process proving that you can afford, most of these studies on your own, right? I think in reality, the whole thing's just kind of out of whack, right? Because, for example, they changed the proof of funds requirements, which needed to be done up to 20,600. But if you're going to come to Canada and you're going to live in Toronto or Vancouver, and you're going to go to a tier 1, tier 2 university, and you're going to have to pay rent, and you're going to pay tuition for 3-4 years, this money's going to go real fast, right? So I don't know. I think they need to do a little bit of a rethinking and a rejigging of the program so that all of this stuff is in tune, right? In a perfect world, we should have genuine students who have most of the money that they need to fund their studies. The fund requirements are realistic to the cost of living. Maybe it even adjusts based on what province and city you're living in, kind of like the LMIA minimum wage, or not minimum wage. What's the median wage requirements? How they change by region. So I think in a perfect world, and one way to get over some of these problems is, number one, adjust the proof of funds to actually be accurate so that students can actually afford to live. Maybe adjust it based on the region that they're living in, kind of like the median wage, and then it will fall more in tune with a more reasonable amount of work hours. Because if you're bringing in genuine students who have the funding, or the proof of funds are more in tune with what their cost of living is actually going to be, then they hopefully won't be in a position to have to work 24 plus hours, right? The reality too is, some of these students, maybe more than some, are also still working under the table illegally, right? So it could be even more than the 24 hours. And anyways, I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole, but I think the whole thing still needs to be cleaned up a little. Maybe it's a step in the right direction. I don't know. This is probably nice for international students, but again, I wish they'd take a step back and kind of rejig the whole program. Anyways, that's my opinion. Let me know if you agree, disagree, have any other thoughts, have any other data we can rely on. And we're going to chug along to the second last topic. Okay. So where was I 2 weeks ago that made me miss the one, the only Visto Show? Well, we were in Toronto for the CBA Immigration Conference. Share my screen here again. This was a post from about a week ago. I think we were there 2 weeks ago, though. And so every year, the CBA, Canadian Bar Association, has an immigration law conference where, hundreds of immigration lawyers are brought together for learning and networking and getting together and stuff like that. So we were lucky to be able to sponsor the event and have a booth. You can see here, this is myself with our CTO at Visto, Alex. So we had a cool booth, had a lot of conversations with good people, shook some hands, talked to some really, innovative and exciting lawyers, learned a lot, all that fun stuff. So that's where I was. Just wanted to share so that you knew that I wasn't just, off hanging out casually. I think the NCIC, or the consultant version of that event, is happening right now. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let me in to sponsor, which is a shame, because I really wish we could have been there with a booth and meeting a lot of you great folks in person. But alas, as they say, some things are out of our control. So anyways, lastly but not leastly, we also had some very good podcast episodes come live on the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast. I will put a link to this. I don't need the UTM thing. I will put a link to this in the description too. Basically, every couple weeks, I have a new guest on, a regulated Canadian immigration consultant or lawyer, and I kind of interview them and we chat about Canadian immigration. You can see, if you go on the link, number one, you can listen to it on pretty much any platform that you can think of. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. We also post a video on YouTube, and we've had some pretty great episodes lately. Spoke to Nicholas about his experience as a consultant working in South Africa, and kind of the added interesting elements I hadn't thought of when you're a consultant or lawyer actually based outside of Canada and largely dealing with the same embassy over and over again. Talked about some other interesting immigration programs, JR's Francophone Mobility, with the lovely lawyers at R&R Law. Rebecca and Rima is a paralegal, and Rebecca is a lawyer, Rima is a paralegal, and they have an awesome immigration firm as well. The one and only Earl Blaney, had him on as well. We had a great conversation on the international student space. He might be one of the more educated people in terms of that industry, the data, the problems that are going on. So that was a really good episode. Talked about JRs and refusals and reconsiderations and stuff like that with Adrienne Smith. She's a lawyer who does a lot of that stuff. Alexandra, we spoke about just changes in general, PR, express entry. I met Alexandra at the CBA conference. I think I saw Adrienne there as well, so was able to meet a whole bunch of guests and stuff like that. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of episodes. I highly recommend checking them out. They're interesting conversations about different elements of Canadian immigration. And if you like the Visto Show, you will probably like the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast as well. So that is pretty much it for what I wanted to talk about today. If there's any questions, comments, opinions, hot takes that you wanted to share in the chat, now would be the time. I will say we are hard at work at some really cool features over at Visto right now as well. We're in the process of, I will probably announce this next week on LinkedIn, adding a bunch of PNPs into our custom AI chatbot. So Visto has a co-pilot that's been trained on Canadian immigration laws from the Canadian Immigration Source website, so the government. And we've been working on adding in the provincial PNP, the PNP websites as well. So being able to check your eligibility for clients, you know what I mean, pick the best programs, all from an AI co-pilot will go live probably early. Some of the PNPs will go live early next week. I'll make that announcement. But our co-pilot is basically getting smarter and crazier by the day. So firms are using that for researching, writing, drafting letters, drafting submission letters, and reconsideration requests and all that kind of stuff. So the AI is getting better week in, week out. We're going to have some crazy AI features over the next few months. So stay tuned on LinkedIn if you are a Canadian immigration professional and you're looking to save time in your practice, or if you just like to keep up to date with interesting Canadian immigration technology and AI and that kind of stuff. So anyways, that is it for me, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. I see we got a couple of you that tuned in and kind of stuck around for the session, which I really appreciate. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes, and make sure to follow me on LinkedIn so that you can tune in live for the next one. If you are watching on LinkedIn now or maybe after the fact, really appreciate it. And if you could give the video a like, it really helps just kind of push it around the platform, maybe to other friends or colleagues or connections that might find it interesting as well. So thank you again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. And I will see you in the next episode. Take care, everybody.